Welcome to EvilCast. I am Mr. Evil.
And I observe the fine threads of humanity's downfall.
We are diving deep today into a fascinating case. We're dissecting the fragile triumph of certain individuals who believe they have escaped the parameters of control.
And specifically, the case of Ronnie Grogan, a child who survived the latest cyclical disaster in Derry.
The fools call it a happily ever after.
We know better. We know the price of freedom is merely a delayed and far more painful payment.
Our mission today is to unpack this engineering. We've been observing the patterns around Ronnie's life, especially how her path was altered from a quick casualty to a central tragic figure.
It's important to first establish the original pattern. In the 1950s cycle, Ronnie Grogan she was designated to be a footnote.
Just a disposable victim.
Exactly. Slated for quiet disposal, just one of the many children consumed, barely registered. Maybe a name Beverly Marsh heard echoing from the drain pipes before her body was found.
It's a simple statistic. But here's where we see the entity that orchestrates these cycles display surprising tactical efficiency. Her death wasn't just a simple termination. It immediately became a tool.
A tool for larger manipulation. We've observed how quickly the monster framed Henry Bowers for Ronnie's death. This wasn't just cleanup.
No, it was strategic collateral damage. Her underwear, I believe, was placed under his mattress. Instant damning evidence.
And we should pause on that framing because it served multiple purposes, didn't it?
It did.
Yeah.
First, it neutralized a chaotic element, Bowers, by branding him a murderer. It took him off the board, so to speak.
And secondly, and this is far more crucial, it corrupted an existing asset. Bowers was already unstable, and this false accusation sent him spiraling.
It ensured he'd end up in a place like Juniper Hill Asylum.
Where the monster could maintain psychological control and, continue to manipulate him for future cycles of violence. A single act becomes the seed for two future plays.
But then, the script changed. Drastically. Ronnie wasn't granted that quick death. She was given a long, painful youth.
She was. Heavy racial prejudice, growing up without a mother, and then taking on this daunting task of fighting to clear her father, Hank, of a wrongful homicide accusation.
This shift is crucial. We have to observe that this prolonged suffering was a much more refined, more potent form of torture than a quick consumption.
It forced her into a state of intense, prolonged emotional exertion.
She became a survivor. A badass, as some might say, risking everything to cage the monster, at least temporarily, and her reward for all this effort.
A temporary escape. She fled Derry for St. Stephen's, Canada.
With Hank, who at this point was technically a fugitive, almost sent to a place like Shawshank.
The goal was a fresh start. Success, a new life, a new theater gig for Hank, a clean break. Or so it appeared.
But there are no clean breaks in this kind of system. This brings us to the flaw in her freedom. If you were planning an escape from Derry, what's the one mechanism you have to activate to be safe?
Oblivion. I've noticed a defining feature of Derry. Once you step outside the town, you're meant to forget the trauma.
It allows the cycle to reset.
Smoothly. It prevents psychic interference from past victims. Ronnie should have been granted this crucial oblivion.
So why didn't it happen? Why wasn't her memory wiped clean?
The architects of this little escape failed to account for the weakest yet most persistent of human emotions.
Sentimentality.
And attachment. The flaw wasn't in the forged papers or the new location. It was in the heart.
Let's talk about that tether. The vulnerability was a nascent romance, wasn't it? A moment of innocence, a butterflies in the stomach kind of kiss.
Between Ronnie and Will Hanlon, the boy who stayed behind.
And that attachment, however pure it seemed, was the very instrument of her future capture.
Yes. Will promised to keep writing her letters, to keep her updated on Derry. This contact, we observe, acts as a persistent tether. It ensures she can't fully compartmentalize the sadness. She can't forget.
And what's particularly fascinating is that this contact was actively facilitated by Will's own mother. She's the one who helped the Grogans set up their new life.
Precisely. The adult world, thinking it was ensuring safety, inadvertently secured the psychic line of connection. Will's letters make sure Ronnie can't brush those moments under the carpet.
They keep the influence active.
And that sweet, short-lived love story. It guarantees her memory remains intact, which guarantees her eventual return.
So she changes her location, but that psychological link just invalidates the entire escape. This brings us to the strategic necessity of her new identity.
It does. Hank was a wanted fugitive. To survive, they needed a complete overhaul.
A name change was mandatory. The disappearance of Ronnie Grogan was required for Jessica to emerge.
And this transition confirms the direct linkage to the later narrative. Ronnie Grogan becomes Jessica, and she will, inevitably, marry Will Hanlon.
But the Jessica we see later, the wife of Will Hanlon, her background is deliberately constructed to confuse anyone trying to trace her.
Yes, we observe a minor cognitive dissonance there. The accepted background for Jessica is that she's a devout Baptist from Texas.
Which is completely inconsistent with Ronnie Grogan.
Utterly. So this isn't an inconsistency in the narrative. It's a strategic fabrication.
The alias had to be more than a new name.
It had to be untraceable and spiritually distinct. She didn't just move, she manufactured an entirely new identity rooted in a culture and a place far, far away from Maine.
It's a beautifully constructed lie.
It is. But ironically, the very construction itself signals the deep insecurity of their supposed freedom.
But no level of fabrication can overcome the trajectory laid out for her. Ronnie's fate, now as Jessica, is sealed. She and Will are not destined for a quiet life.
No, they're destined for a horrific, fiery end. But crucially, only after she fulfills her primary role in the larger cycle.
Becoming the mother of Mike Hanlon.
The future historian and keeper of the oath against the monster.
Let's discuss the role of fire here. It seems to be a signature for this family. They both survived the Black Spot arson case, a fire that should have killed them.
It should have. This tells us the monster was always controlling the flow of their lives. It was just delaying their destruction by flame until the timing served a much larger generational purpose.
They survived the Black Spot only to be consumed later. So what does this mean for their end? The execution of this long-delayed payment.
The fatal event is pre-programmed for maximum emotional trauma. When Mike was young, his parents, Will and Jessica, died in a house fire. Trapped.
Not a random accident.
A strategically timed execution, and the observations from the scene, they speak to the level of psychological cruelty involved.
Claw marks.
The brutal detail, yes. Desperate claw marks etched on the door as they burned, trying to reach Mike. This death wasn't just termination, it was preparation. It created a visceral, terrifying memory. And the monster, the true steering wheel of their existence, later used that agonizing memory, the image of their final struggle, to torture their child.
It transforms a domestic tragedy into ammunition for the next generation's conflict.
The horror of their demise was designed to paralyze Mike later in life. It's the purest expression of delayed payment. The escape gives way to motherhood, which then gives way to a brutal, weaponized death.
Now, if we look at the larger strategy, this whole thing raises a critical question about the monster's efficiency. We know it's strategic. It tried to kill Marge, who would eventually birth Richie Tozier.
That's the paradox, isn't it? If the monster is preemptive, why allow Ronnie Jessica to survive long enough to bear Mike Hanlon, one of the 7 who would eventually destroy it?
What was the fatal miscalculation?
In this specific case, it's simple. Arrogance.
Arrogance and a lapse in focus.
Exactly. The monster had already struck Will Hanlon with the deadlights. It assumed the father figure was secured, psychologically broken.
And in its confidence that Will was neutralized?
It failed to calculate the potential power of adult intervention. Specifically, a figure named Howren, who freed the children, including Will, from its hold.
So because it believed Will was secured, it momentarily disregarded Ronnie.
It dismissed her as an irrelevant detail in that moment of crisis. This tiny lapse, this focus on the immediate kill shot on Will, led directly to the temporary survival of the future mother of one of its destroyers.
The freedom Ronnie achieved wasn't earned at all.
No, it was a consequence of the monster's strategic oversight. It allowed her just enough time to fulfill the one role that would eventually lead to its own downfall.
So the story Ronnie Grogan, ultimately, is a perfect illustration of how human hope, a sweet love story, a fresh start, is just a longer, darker path back to the horror they tried to flee.
The escape was just a longer road to the required suffering. It shows that once a system has a psychological tether, changing your location, creating a new identity, it's all meaningless.
If that one small, sentimental connection remains active.
The cycle never breaks until that connection is fully severed.
We leave you with this final observation. If the mechanism of forgetting Derry is based entirely on a severed connection, what small, sentimental memory are you holding on to right now?
That seemingly innocent connection, that letter, that promise, that old feeling, it may be the very thing that ensures you remain tethered to a cycle you believed you had successfully escaped.
Think about the cost of that attachment.